I really love your expertise in people. Like, you know all things about people and teams and how that really scales companies. And I think that the people piece is the most important, but it's something that entrepreneurs often miss.
That was one of the, the first big competencies we needed.
That was like the one thing, right? I always try to say, like, what's the one thing that really moved the needle the most, the 80-20 Pareto's principle. Hi, I'm Candy Valentino, and for the last 25 years, I've been building businesses and generating wealth, starting my first business when I was just 19. Since then, I've gone on to build, scale, acquire, and exit businesses, all while investing in real estate and building financial freedom. Now it's all about you and why we're bringing you the real story behind building businesses and generating wealth here at the Candy Valentino Show. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of the Candy Valentino Show. Hope you're doing well as we come into this last quarter of the year. I wanted to be able to talk about a few business topics as we get into the last quarter. I know so many people are either taking their foot off the gas in order to spend time with family in the last quarter of the year, or you're doubling down your efforts because you know that if you double down during this time, that you're going to have a greater start to the beginning of the next year. So I wanted to just talk about more business topics that I believe all entrepreneurs really want to hear about, and some of the things that I find that a lot of business owners get tripped up on. And so when we were looking at the people we wanted to talk about, Annie Hyman Pratt was at the top of my list. And so I want you to be able to listen to this conversation because Annie, thank you so much for joining us today, for being able to come in over Firebridge to be able to have this conversation. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we were chatting right before we hit record, and I want to go back because I really love your expertise in people. Like, you know all things about people and teams and how that really scales companies. And I think that the people piece is the most important, but it's something that entrepreneurs often miss. But before that, I think it's really cool, your story, because when you started in your family's company, which for most people, if you don't know, Annie's family started the coffee bean and tea leaf businesses. So if you've ever been in a mall or in an airport and you see coffee bean and tea leaf, that's Annie. And when you started in your family's company, you guys were small, mom and pop, only 7 locations. Tell us a little bit what you strategically did to scale to the mega brand that you created before exiting.
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, my parents started the business in the 60s. And when they started the business, we only sold beans, like pounds of coffee. And people would come into all kinds of specialty retail and you'd buy cheese at the cheese store and bread at the bakery and buy some pounds of coffee or tea to take home and make. And that was their business for a few decades. And then and they grew pretty well. They got up at one point to 16 stores. But then in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, the environment really changed and specialty retail was really going down. People were moving to the suburbs. Then the big box stores came in. You might remember Price Club. and at that time is when the business completely changed. Like in 1986, when I was working, I was in high school and working in a coffee bean store in Beverly Hills. That store might do $2,000 in beans and $200 in what we called the bar. So for drinks, we had espresso machines, we had cappuccinos and lattes and fancy drinks, but nobody came in to buy those. By 1992, that ratio had completely reversed. So I think of it as the coffee beverage revolution, where people were commuting a lot more from the suburbs into the city to, go to work and wanted really great, didn't want to make things at home, wanted some good coffee out. And it also became very much an affordable luxury. And so I had really good timing coming back into the business at the beginning of the 90s, coming back into the business, where I think of it as like we had wind at our back because there was a lot of people who were exploring gourmet coffee drinks. And so I think the thing that we did that really helped us expand quickly was get on board with that. Meaning, we remodeled stores quickly.
Mm.
Meaning, when we were finding new locations, we were really focused on the beverage parts. We became very famous for the cold iced coffee blended uh, shakes, right? Ice blended mochas, ice blended vanillas, and we invented those. and and we, we really uh, made our stores a really nice environment. We put a lot more tables and chairs in, made it a great place to hang out, and people wanted those great drinks. And I think that was, I had good timing and I had a really strong focus on what
That's amazing. So, originally coming out, mainly
mattered.
just selling beans, seeing this revolution shift of how people are, the customer base was changing, the demographic was maybe having some different buying behaviors. And when I was thinking about the timeline, obviously there's a large coffee company that was just coming up at this time as well, right?
Yes.
The early 90s, late
Yes.
80s. So you've got that
Yes.
revolution. You guys are on
Yes.
the cutting edge of this, the front of this, created the actual iced, the mocha
Ice blended.
blended. I mean, that's
Yep.
fantastic. So then from there, you obviously
Yeah.
pivoted the business model, stuck and found out what really worked and what people were buying. Did you also identify, were there better margins in those as well?
Yes, but the margins were, it was a good time for the coffee business and for real estate. I mean, when you go into a coffee bean, or and I think you were kind of mentioning Starbucks was on the scene. And by the way, they were really good for our business. We were scared at first, but they were great for the business because they did a great job educating people that you should want a fancy Italian coffee beverage. So so it was good.
What made you decide to really start to scale? Did you just see like we're in a really great time and you started to identify the data?
Yes.
And then what
Yes.
were the next steps you took?
Actually, I had to really work with my parents at that point to figure out how we were going to finance the growth, right?
Yeah.
Because we were very fortunate that we could put on stores that would break even pretty quickly. We would hope to pay back a store in 3 years, which is very, very fast for a
Yeah.
quick serve food or that kind of a concept. And but that still means that we needed to fund the growth. And my parents were really great in that they were willing to keep in their profits. And because of that, then we could borrow money from the bank, right? We would keep in our dollar, we'd get to borrow too from the bank. And then we had to be super careful that we didn't put on too many duds.
Mm.
That when we opened stores, that they really did perform.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to learn very quickly and became, I think, experts in real estate. That was one of the first big competencies we needed because the foot traffic, how would I say, like you can't, at the time, you couldn't make up for a poor location with really great advertising or marketing or product.
Yeah.
You needed to have a good spot.
So
And so we were good at that.
So that was something that you really, that was like the one thing, right? I always try to say, like, what's the one thing that really moved the needle the most, the 80-20 Pareto's principle. So you identified, we've got to get good locations because we can't outmarket or advertise in order
That's
to
right.
compensate for a bad location. So what was the thought process? How did you start to identify the best locations to expand into?
Oh, yes. So we also were pretty, fortunate that we were in Southern California, and we knew this market pretty well. We had a very strong real estate person who I ended up marrying.
Bonus.
And yeah, 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 yeah. And this person also had really good experience doing overseas licensing. And he was really the one who helped us consider that for expansion.
Hmm.
My parents did not want business partners or investors here domestically.
Hmm.
But overseas, it really works to do licensing because we don't know those markets. We certainly aren't there to operate units. And so we decided to do some overseas licensing. We started in Southeast Asia. They ended up being an extremely strong licensee for us. And at the very end of the 90s, they basically turned around and bought us.
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Yes.
let's go. So, okay, I know some people when they really start to scale, especially in the brick and mortar space, they're always struggling with, should I scale and retain them all on my own? Should I adopt a franchising model? What are the benefits? What are the downsides? I know that you guys evaluated all of this. Can you just give us a little summary of some of the thought processes that you went through of why you decided to not franchise in the States, but yet attempt it overseas?
In the States, it was, how would I say? It was hard to get the operating consistency when you've got a lot of owners. And it's a bit of a almost like a control issue, right? It's if you're going to grow very fast, especially, we really felt strongly at the time that when we have kind of the bigger say, we can set the standards, we can say how much training you really need, we can make the calls about this, this store needs different management. It's so much faster and easier to do that when you own the locations. And the financial model was working so well, we could. Definitely it slowed the growth, right? Because we grow kind of store by store. When you franchise or license, you often can do, a 10 or a 50 store deal.
Right.
Yes. And they can roll out very quickly. But we knew that our advantage was really in having great quality product and really, good service, that we weren't going to outgrow Starbucks, for example. So at the time, we did make a conscious choice to grow strong as fast as we could, but not so fast that we would take a franchise, do a domestic franchise or a license agreement.
Wow.
I think eventually we probably would have done some franchising and licensing, just because there ended up being places. In fact, we were going for a airport license at the time, but there ended up being places where it's hard to be it without a licensing. Overseas, you could find an operator and somebody who really knew the real estate, who had often been in a restaurant or quick serve food business before, who had relationships, who had talent.
Yeah. So when you were expanding locally, okay, I think this is interesting too, because I think sometimes entrepreneurs just operate on instinct when they're in the startup mode, right? Like, how do they feel they should expand? And, oh, let's just go open up another city or another state. But they're not really developing the data points to make that decision intentionally. So what did you evaluate to make the data-driven decision to know when you should open up a new store, whether it was in 1 month or 1 year? What were you looking at and measuring to know we have enough business to go here?
We knew that if we could be in an area where, what I say, like, most people in Northern California have been to Southern California at one point, right? When we went to San Diego, we knew that people that live in San Diego come to LA sometimes. And so it made a lot more sense for us to expand within California first, then go to somewhere else like, I don't know, Arizona or Texas or something like that, where you have to start building your brand much more from scratch, right? It's people don't automatically know you. I mean, of course, people travel, and lots of people come to LA. So certainly, you have some, but not quite the same as kind of branching out locally. So we also knew that it was so much easier to operate stores when we were closer together. For staffing, for training, for regional managers going store to store and being able to, kind of see 5 stores in a day instead of going, driving to Arizona to see 1 store.
Yeah.
That's really hard to manage.
And the expense and the operations. And I think sometimes when people are trying to expand into a whole new state, I mean, just the little things about your employees and what you have to set up for taxes and like all of those little things that now occupy your mind as opposed to. So I love how intentional you were about the build and how you really realized that, okay, this is actually easier to manage. And then at what point did you start to branch out of those states? Or was that when you were acquired?
We had branched all within California, and we had some leases. I think we had some leases in Nevada at the time. And then we were bought. We were bought pretty suddenly. Like we weren't planning to sell. And it was not my first choice at the time. But looking back, but looking back, my parents knew something that I really didn't, because at that point I had just turned 30, and had the experience of growth that was absolutely working, was putting on debt, because that's how we grew. And my parents had been through the 70s and the 80s, the late 70s and the early 80s, where they had to shrink in the end of those stores.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that business doesn't only go up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was really feeling like, wait a minute, I wanted to do this my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
so I wasn't ready to sell it. But they were, they had a lifetime in this business. I'm one of 5 kids, and they knew that this was a good time to sell. And we had a very strategic buyer, a buyer, a built-in buyer, which is really unique at the time.
It's not like that happens every day. Strategic buyer, great buyer, overpay, like just all of the things when they align, it just, even though it might not be on our timeline, maybe it's just more of divine timing when it happens that it should. So let's look at, obviously you did that. There was probably a little bit of heartbreak and some loss, if we're being transparent, for you, because you had envisioned doing that. Now you have this big pivot.
A lot.
And I think that people experience pivots in business. Sometimes they choose them. Sometimes they are forced upon them because maybe a business ideal failed or something that they were wanting to do didn't work out the way they wanted. How did you see that positively, if you did, in order to shift into the work that you've been doing for the last 25, 30 years, however long it's been?
At first, I didn't see it positively. I was more stunned. It was more like a deer in headlights for a few years, really. I had another baby. My, at the time, husband and I ended up building a house, trying to figure out what the heck to do next.
Mm-hmm.
Started another business, a surf apparel brand that my husband had experience with. And we, for me, I was just trying to get a grip on what was my life going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a bit. And then I ended up doing some interim consulting because I didn't know what I was going to do. So I was doing interim executive roles, I should say. Would come into businesses either as an interim CEO, CFO, COO, somewhere in the C-suite. Sometimes in businesses that just had a vacancy. Sometimes businesses that just purchased or needed a turnaround. And I would stay for 6 months or sometimes a year, get the infrastructure in place, hire my replacement, and then move on to the next one. And I thought I would do that for just a year or two, and I ended up doing it for almost a decade.
Wow.
And it was a thing where I didn't think it was going to be near as interesting and beneficial as it was, because I got to see so many different businesses.
Yeah.
To branch out, right? Not just coffee or quick serve food. I did that. I did full serve restaurants. I did manufacturing. I did high-end consulting. I did baking, entertainment, agencies, other kinds of advertising agencies. Talent agencies. Did all kinds of businesses that gave me even more insight into how business really works. And that's actually where I got so interested in the really, where I where it really was clear that it was all about the people. I could walk into a business that had, good product, a good financial structure, was doing fairly well, maybe having some bumps. But if the people weren't doing well, it was going to head downhill. If we didn't have good people who could actually work together to get results, then you know time without that, time is short.
Hmm.
You're heading downhill quickly. And so that just became so clear to me, business after business after business.
It's fascinating because I've noticed, same thing working with businesses, how similar it could be a totally different industry, but the problems are all the same. And it really depends on where they are in their build or their scale, or, what kind of benchmarks that they're hitting, or even what constraints that they're looking to get past. But like, it's amazing how similar the problems are. So you've identified people as being like consistently, if they don't have that right, your business is not going to do well. It's basically like a ticking time bomb, right? So business owners that maybe are hearing this, because I know that they'll probably have heard me talk about financials and data, which I think that's a key important part to any business that you're in.
Absolutely.
People and processes
Absolutely.
is like that other bucket, right? People and processes and identifying those people and leading those people. Is there any other thing outside of people? Because I definitely want to dive into this deep. Is there anything that you saw consistently across the board that businesses really needed to be great at in order to succeed?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think when I would come into businesses and talk to team members, talk to the leaders in the business, I knew that we were going to have we had a giant problem when one of the first things they would say is, I don't really know what we're going for. I don't really know what the goals are. I'm not really sure kind of what we're doing. And, and then what comes right with that is like, I don't know my role. Hoping you can figure out my role here. So what what I found is that entrepreneurs generally, because I came into so many entrepreneurial businesses where they were having to make a transition, and maybe they should have already made it. They hadn't yet. But entrepreneurs, when they start a business, they can have everything in their head. They're going to do everything. So they don't really need to be sharing goals, articulating what it looks like. You don't need to lay out the strategy. They don't need to coordinate people. And then as they go along, they try to learn and tell people a bit what to do, but they're not educated in, here's how you actually make a goal, describe the goal, break it down into projects, get a strategy behind it, and talk about that with everybody.
Mm-hmm. How can they do it better?
So goals are something you're trying to achieve. And I think of a goal as something where you either want to do something new or make a big change. You want to think about the specific end results. And I think that the easiest way to do it is to really be thinking about what's new and what's different. What's new and what's different. What I'm finding for most businesses I work with is their big priorities are in the strategic goals. Because everything keeps changing. It's like that we can't stop the external world from changing.
Right.
And so as that keeps happening, right, the technology keeps changing, and what your clients really want keeps changing, and your competition keeps changing. Just everything keeps changing. And so, those strategic goals are super important.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, change is inevitable. I don't know whose quote it is. Change is inevitable, but progress is not. So it's like, in order to continually progress, we always have to identify and adopt new behaviors and new goals and new strategies. And I love that. And I think that no matter what, right? Like no matter what strategy, no matter what progress we're looking to make, no matter what we want to achieve, no matter what in business, we cannot do it by being a solopreneur. We can't do it by being
Right.
self-employed. We have to leverage people and learn how to replace ourselves and really fire ourselves in multiple roles in the business.
Yes.
And so I love how you've really identified by working with humans in the business and really the dynamic of how to grow people and lead teams is really the core of every business that wants to scale. Like we're all in the people business, right?
Exactly.
No matter what.
Yes. Yes. And to scale and to have the lifestyle you want as well, right? Because to, if to have a business that's kind of sustainable, that that you get to take vacations, that you don't have to overwork all the time. You're you in today's day and age, you still need people. The robots are still not anywhere near as good as people. Even with AI being everywhere now, it doesn't. It's AI still can't take in as many variables as a human being can and make sense of it. Still, just not yet.
Yeah.
Maybe that's coming, but not yet.
And it's interesting. I think even if it does come at some point, I think that there is still, humans are still wired for interaction with people. So I think even if we get to a point that AI can run themselves, I almost feel like the human interaction will just be even more of a premium because people will always crave that. That's just who we are as humans and how we're wired. But you talk in your book about the people part and these 7 agreements that entrepreneurs need in order to build teams. And I know it's a book that everybody needs to get that has a business and wants to build a team in order to grow their business. So I want them to get it and read it. But if you can just digest, what are some of the principles that maybe people can take away now in order to start to implement the people part?
One of the biggest principles, or the kind of a big main understanding in the book is that I think of business as having kind of 2 main parts. One is the business part. That includes goals, structure, goals, functions, metrics, measurement, processes, all that. That's all in the business part. Okay. But every business has the people part underneath. That it rides on us people making those goals happen, setting those goals, getting those goals, working together to do projects and whatnot. And because people are not robots, we as people need to recognize that human beings have what would I say? We have a reactive side that is not helpful in business. And we have a self-leadership side that where we are secure inside ourselves, where we're not being emotionally reactive, which is where our great work comes from. This is where humans have, say it a little differently. Humans have in our brain, we have this kind of hardwired central nervous system where the amygdala sits right on top of your brainstem. And it's the part that's old as time that all mammals have that is wired to react. That's where every piece of information that comes in, we are unconsciously detecting threats. It's something that humans can't turn off. I don't think any animals can. It's like you just can't turn that off. And so when we perceive threats, we go into emotional reactivity. And that's the fight, flight. Think of it as fight, flight, freeze, or please. Those are behaviors that are meant for survival. This part of our brain is the part that we value in business. That's the part where we get to build the most amazing things. But the more time we spend in emotional reactivity, the more we don't even have the team. Or than when people trigger each other. So it's like you can think of it as, I believe, why people say that the people problems are the hardest is because when you're dealing with an emotionally reactive person, and by the way, everybody has times that they're emotionally reactive. We're human. We're human. But all of us know that when you're dealing with somebody who's in a tremendous amount of fear or emotional pain or upset or anger or depression or whatnot, there's nothing good happening. There's no way to move the needle. You're just kind of stuck with a problem. And so recognizing that, we need to teach ourselves, learn how to get ourselves out of that emotional reactivity. This people part, the part of self-leadership, relationships, and agreements, which I'll talk about next, that those three pieces we've got to understand and learn to do to really be super functional business, to be high performing. So humans work best when we have a good understanding of what we're going for and we're agreeing on what we're each going to do.
So if people that are listening right now are watching this and they say, you know what, my business kind of feels chaotic right now. I don't feel like I have a clear plan of what's next. I'm just taking this messy action, which so often is what's needed in the beginning because there is no play-by-play, right? There's no playbook. So you kind of have to take messy action and taste things and see what works. But if they're maybe, now out of their startup mode and they're starting to scale and it still feels a little messy and chaotic, would you tell them to start looking at the people aspect?
Yes. And for sure, start looking at the people aspect and also start looking at the structure aspect. Meaning that as a company grows, it needs to get better organized. Organized meaning like what people are doing. So for example, when an entrepreneur starts a business, that entrepreneur may be doing marketing, sales, finance, and delivery. Maybe doing it all. Okay. Then as the business grows, then you have to start to think about, okay, wait, delivery is different than marketing. We, probably we're going to have people who specialize a little more in each. And we're going to need to organize the work so that delivery knows what it's going for, what it has to deliver, etc. That marketing does its thing. If you've got a person working in both areas, that's okay, but they need to know, right now, I've got my marketing hat on. Right now, I've got my delivery hat on. And to start organizing your business into think of it as its functions so that it is less chaotic. You don't have to, how would I say, why we need structure and process, I think of as part of structure, because it's the things that we can put in place that we don't have to keep redeciding every day. I don't have to keep, figuring out what you're doing today if I know that you're in marketing.
Right.
That you've got you've got marketing goals, and you know what leads we need to bring in. You know how to do that. Then I don't have to keep thinking about who's going to do marketing today. Will it be enough?
Which takes up bandwidth in your brain, right?
So much.
Oh my gosh,
so much.
It just burns through. And I think what I see is entrepreneurs don't want to take the time because they're so busy to really lay out an organizational chart, find who they need in each role, because, I got all this stuff to go on, but they don't realize by investing that time now, they save so much time later and the mental bandwidth so that you can create a new product or a new line of revenue or a new service or a new location. And so I love that you're talking about this. Do you have any process that you take people through of who they need to hire next or how to start to identify who your next hire should be, or if they should start tiering their organizational chart?
And I think that in general, it's like, where are you going to get the most leverage? And I think when you think of yourself as a resource, like, you as an entrepreneur, you need to be thinking about where do I spend a lot of time, but where am I carrying heavy responsibility that somebody else could carry? Because most entrepreneurs, have an area that's fairly easy for them, or maybe it's the part that is key to their business. Most entrepreneurs that have any kind of a information or consulting type business, think of them as talent, the on-screen talent.
Yep.
And they're going to keep that for a long time, right? So, so nobody would come in and say, yeah, I think you should hire somebody else to, deliver your stuff. Probably not that.
Yeah.
But what you are going to start looking for are people who can take over the full financial function, people that can take over the internal operations, maybe the market, maybe the delivery. It's like you're looking for people who can that start to take things off your plate, but then also can grow into taking a real responsibility. And I think that's where entrepreneurs can get stuck, in that they will hire people, but then they have to spend so much time supervising
Yes.
them
Oh my gosh.
that they haven't got the responsibility off their plate.
Yes.
Right. So what you're going for is really, having a plan and a development plan in mind of like, okay, I have this person and maybe I need to train them for a year or, or whatnot. But after a year, they're going to be able to do the marketing with almost, very little support.
Yeah.
Meeting with me once a week.
Mm-hmm. Autonomy. Yeah.
Not, not bringing me every ad to check.
Yes.
Not bring me, not having me find the mistakes and then, wondering what the heck happened.
Because then they go into that
they are
manager role and they're not really into the entrepreneur role ever. And then they're just actually taking on more responsibility, because now we're moving from the talent or the artist to now you're the talent, the artist, and the manager. And it gets very frustrating. And I think that's why people are like, oh, I don't even want employees, because really what it's that they're not hiring the right people and then giving them the ability to self-lead and make decisions outside of themselves.
Yes. And to develop them. And to really think of people as on a development path. I think of it like an athlete, right? Like, you hire maybe somebody, a high school athlete, but you need them to develop into a really, great college athlete, into a pro.
Yeah.
And especially because it's pretty hard for entrepreneurs early on to hire top talent. Mm-hmm. They're too expensive. Yep. They don't have the infrastructure for it.
Yep.
So you want to hire people that are ambitious and want to grow, and and are smart and can learn things like self-leadership, can really step up. And then you've got to set them up for success. And it's not a small thing, but but it absolutely is doable. And one other thing that I'll say, that mistake I see entrepreneurs make all the time is really focusing on finding one person to operate the whole business. Mm. That always fails. I'll just say, I've never seen it work.
I've never seen it work.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time.
What you're doing as an entrepreneur is you are building first functional leaders. Again, somebody who can take charge of marketing, somebody who can take charge of technology, somebody who can take charge of delivery, customer service, and whatnot. So that then you've got a small team of, 2, 3, 4 people. Maybe some of them even do 2 functions. Mm-hmm. But now you've got a team of a small leadership team that can carry the load. Mm-hmm. You don't have one person who's a poor replacement for the founder.
Yes.
So everybody wants to go around, who doesn't know what they're doing in the functions. They can't know every function. So what you're really looking for is these functional leaders first. Then when you have functional leaders, sure, you can bring in a director or a COO to supervise all the leaders, but those people need to manage leaders. You cannot have one person managing, 5, 6, 8 functions.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster.
And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are trying to find that person. And I always say, even if that person existed, that person would be an entrepreneur. Because they're not going to come work for you as your ops person, and handle all that. Because if they can handle all that and they have all that ability, they're going to go do it for themselves, most likely. So I love that you touched
Well
on
said.
that, because I do see that that is a common mistake. And I want to be respectful of your time, because I feel like we could have conversations about this all day long. I want to be able to put we're going to put it in the show notes and in the caption so that people can find your book, learn more about you. But I do have one final question. So we typically ask all business owners and entrepreneurs and investors that come on here, we say, if you woke
Yeah.
up tomorrow, Annie, and everything that you've built,
Yeah.
your teams and your company and your book and your network, because you have a very expansive network, if everything was gone,
Yes.
you had no dollars in your bank account, nobody would pick up your phone call, nobody knew who you were, but you had all the information that you've retained and built over all of these decades, and you
Yeah.
had to start doing something tomorrow to build it all back, what would you start with in the morning?
I would start with reaching out to some people, because the thing that I know is you can't do much alone. It just isn't, you know, it's really hard to accomplish things. And honestly, the more experience I get, the more I realize that it's not even just about dividing the labor. It's really about having people share in the responsibility, in the emotional ups and downs, in the, having each other's back.
Mm-hmm.
That you have people who are there, who are up when you're down.
Mm-hmm.
You're up when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's to me, it's kind of everything.
Mm.
And it's a little funny. I think I'm laughing at myself because I'm very much an introvert. Like, I need my alone time,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like, I know, like, to really accomplish things, like, I need people, and not just a set of hands. I need other minds who are engaged, who can help me think things through, who can help me weather a storm, who are in it.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Which most people don't realize, I'm an introvert also. So I kind of charge back up by myself, which is funny as I do this. But, but like you, when I exited my last company, I kind of pulled back, and I really didn't want to build a team, and I didn't want to look, because I'd been doing, for 20 plus years, I'd been doing that.
Yeah.
But what I realized is, like, I love how you just so articulated that. It's not sharing the labor or giving roles. It's like, I need other people's brains and ideas, and, like, to have the team mentality where we're doing this together. I think it just makes everyone better. And so I just love who you are. I love everything that you focused on with people, because I think it's so important. I think a lot of entrepreneurs really miss this part, and how intentional we can be with it, and how we can really help other people in their journeys to be better people on our team. So thank you for spending this time together, and for all of your work and just your brilliance. It was just such a pleasure having you on.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for what you do for all the entrepreneurs out there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Annie.